Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Flame, and this time we are clearing the grill before you add more meat. Basically, you don't need to always add more tools. Sometimes you just need fewer blockers in those processes. And so let's kick it straight off. Now, Ed, we typically hear about symptoms of tooling fatigue, but what are the common ones that you might hear?
Yeah, so it's kind of relates to our last podcast about context switching, right? So if you have 50 tools and those are all part of your everyday workflow process, you're going to be context switching 50 times, right? So that and I think what was the stat? It takes you 23 minutes to recover from
23 minutes. Exactly. And on average, like enterprises have like 130 tools.
Yeah,
that's a lot of wasted time.
So that's a lot of tools in an enterprise organization that you need to bounce through, kind of thing. And so, I think a lot of times enterprises accumulate tools that they may not need, so they get a little bit of tool sprawl going on. And so, and then the problem is that you have all these tools that you utilize in your workflow process, and some of them might be configured to send you notifications on specific alerts or events or actions, and then you get those notifications, whether they're in Slack or email. And so now you have some more context switching because you're getting notified. And that just leads to,
it's an exponential growth. And I think some of the typical things that we hear, so, again, we have too many tools. I don't know where to find this particular information. These are all, first of all, a massive hit on the context switching, but this is when you're spotting tool fatigue, right? We've added a tool, we've not utilized or looked at what we currently have, for example.
Yeah, and then sometimes you get like civil wars within enterprise organizations over which tool to use. So, hey, half the company's using Confluence, and then the other half is using SharePoint. It's like, now you have duplicate maintenance, duplicate.
Exactly.
So it's crazy.
Yeah. And you'll typically hear of people blaming the tool, but actually the tool is just highlighting and signifying a symptom of a problem, right? It is, for example, in this case, we have too many tools, or I don't know where to find this information. Yeah, because you have duplicate systems doing a duplicate role. Yep. So where should that information live, right? This is where process has to define the product's use and outcome.
Yep, totally agree.
So we've understood what tooling fatigue is, but let's maybe take a look at an example then, Ed, about when product switching or when products are the right time to kind of either enhance or not enhance problems with processes.
Yeah, so I have a great example of this where in my vibe coding, so with the first application I ever built was my one to help people find barbecue joints anywhere in the world, right? So you could look up London, England, you could look up Atlanta, Georgia, anywhere, and it'll pull up a list of all the barbecue places around there. So when I originally built this, I way over engineered it, and I deployed it on AWS, which had like 5 different applications. You had your S3 bucket, your EC2 serverless functions. You had the domain register, everything. So everything was on AWS, because I was like, ooh, I could scale if I need to, right? Because then it'll just instantly scale up. But it was a pain to manage and update and to deploy. And so what I ended up doing was taking it off AWS and just putting it into Vercel, which was super easy to do. It's and I've got it tied to my GitHub, so whenever there's a push, it deploys to Vercel. It's easy to maintain. Does a deployment every time. So way more efficient from my perspective from that. So I kind of used the wrong tool to begin with, and then I moved over to a better tool for my process.
Yeah, so I think there is that you identified a gap in your process. You looked at the current integration between different products, so you'll get your GitHub repo and the Vercel, so your actual deployment tool, and you said, okay, well, I can immediately simplify this bit of process by doing X. It integrates, it does this, it handles it all for me. So now there's less stress on me. That is when process and product work really, really well.
Yeah.
I, on the other hand, have a point where it has not been so good. So previous role, I was looking after both ServiceNow, well, I was at the time working with a ServiceNow team. They were trying to move into the Atlassian ecosystem that I looked after for this particular customer. Now, this service team in ServiceNow had a horrible escalation process. You would not believe the type of stuff that they had to do within this team, right? We're talking levels of approvals, loads of custom field data, comments here, comments there, status. Honestly, it was horrible. Now, they said, we want to move to Jira. And I was like, okay, that's really great. We already had Jira Service Management implemented
Perfect.
into different areas. So the teams were already semi-familiar. So there wasn't loads of re-education time. But the manager said, oh, I want to pick up my current process and I just want to put it over here. Jira's going to manage it better. And I said, is it? Yes, you could automate this, and this, but your process is still the problem. Your experience will still be the same. And you're going to end up going through this absolute product blame cycle of, oh, well, I've got something broken, so the tool's not good enough, and I'm going to go buy a new tool. And yeah, that tool might work great for 2 months during that honeymoon period, but you're then going to go, oh, well, something's broken. I'm going to buy a new tool and we're going to move back to ServiceNow. You're not solving the problem, which is the underlying process isn't right. It's
Yeah.
not, it's over processed. And you can simplify it. You could remove these steps, which no one cares about. That's when it's a process problem.
Yeah. Moving a bad process from one tool to another tool, it's still a bad process.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And I think there's some key indicators of when it is a bad process, which is same tool, but wildly different team experiences. Again, so if you've had 2 service teams lined up, you might, again, we talked about the honeymoon period. If you do switch tools, a common one though is people are inherently lazy. The best way to find, and I can't remember, there's a famous quote, which is, I think it might have been Steve Jobs, where it's like, the best person to give a problem to is a lazy person because they'll find the best way to do it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, and that is when workarounds are normal because processes are over processed and require way too many things. This is when it's a process problem because people don't want to follow the process. They find the workaround, and that is when you can really products are not going to solve the problem here.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Another indicator of that is like, if your team members keep saying, well, we need training on the process, that usually
Yeah.
indicates that's a very complex process that's going on, right? I think, Appfire, we kind of learned a lesson on that with our big picture application, right? Initially the onboarding was super complex and, crazy long. And so it was just not resonating with the users. And so we literally had to go back and redo the entire onboarding process of getting users into big picture to make it way more less complicated. So that process was way more streamlined so that users could understand it better.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the problem that we're going to talk about and try and solve now. So I think how do we maybe identify when there is a problem, or sorry, we've already identified, and how can we kind of resolve that?
Well, first of all, we need to make sure that our process is documented, right? So like we mentioned in other episodes with our knowledge base, do we have our process documented, and is it in a standard or templatized way that is easily accessible and understandable to humans and obviously AI, because we want to be able to pull in AI if we need to reevaluate our processes, right? So if we have that in place and we're still having issues with the process, then we have to, I think we go to the default of getting the team together and we start to work through the process. We identify where the team thinks there's blockers, right? Is there blockers on, in the process where there's any handoffs? Is there not enough context that is being applied for a specific step within the process? Where do we have to, fine tune and tweak that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, the handoffs is huge, right? We've mentioned it in previous episodes. We even mentioned it last season about doing warm and active handoffs between, especially if you're a global service team. They are still points of friction. They are still points of bottlenecking, knowledge and optimization rules. That is all easy points to identify. I think one of the things that I used to love doing, again, mentioned it even last week, is mind mapping. If you're
Yeah.
getting the team together to identify where a process is broken, first of all, one person cannot solve everything. They are not the
Correct.
eyes of the team. Get the team together. The second thing is, as you're get your team through and load up that document that you've got on Confluence and say, this is the process. So we're going to work through this visual diagram of the process. What did the team do here? Is that following process? Get them to write on sticky notes and say, actually, I can't do that because I haven't got this piece of information yet. I have to get that from stage 3. So you've already identified a blocker.
Yeah.
Write all of those things down for each of the stages on sticky notes, and that becomes a checklist to help you reevaluate how you would need things to move around that process. I think that's a really easy way to kind of deal with handoffs and how to deal with mapping and identifying problems and reworking loops, etc. I think those are the easy things to deal with.
I think to expand on that a little bit, what I would also add is when you're kind of mapping out the process, each team member who is involved in the process is going to have a different perspective. And then, and what I would also do is have each team member map out what tools do they use for their part of the process. Right. And so again, we need to make sure that, do we have common tools across multiple steps of the process, or again, we're trying to evaluate, do we have the right tools for the process kind of thing. And so we get the team members to map out which ones they're using. We can kind of have a better view of which ones are being utilized and then how they're being utilized through that whole process to add to that.
Exactly that. And I think, when you're going through that process, if you play the why does this step exist? I mean, Elon Musk is famous for saying the best part is no part, right? As he was designing or going through the Tesla, there's I can't remember which podcast he was on, but he was talking about trying to eliminate a step, and he slept in the Tesla factory for ages. But the point is that, does this thing add value? Who does it benefit? What happens if we skip it? And does it change the outcome? Because if all of that is positive towards you do need it, great. Do you have the right product? As you mentioned, how well is it integrated into the process? Can it automatically share information from, if we're talking about, again, service teams, is the monitoring automatically being plugged into Jira? Can I load up Jira and automatically see what the monitoring tool says for that particular product? That is reducing context switching. You've got the right tools, and you can immediately resolve or deal with the problem in front of you.
Exactly. But to kind of keep going on your point of mind mapping on how you figured out what your processes are, I think there's a couple other ways that teams can utilize for figuring out, the processes and are they making sense, and do the tools that are being utilized make the most sense. One is obviously you can do retrospectives where you can ask the team members, what went right, what went wrong, where are you seeing some issues, and then also some metrics. So do you have any specific metric that you're tracking, who's working on? And a very specific example of this is in the software engineering intelligence space, right?
Yes.
So for example, Appfire has Flow, Atlassian has DX for those specific software engineering intelligence metrics. And what that allows you to do is see what the developer's process is. And you can see, hey, Dan has had 5 pull requests this week, but he hasn't closed them out because he's slammed with other projects. So, we can see that's a bottleneck in the process, Dan's process, his work process, So, we can actually start to utilize these metrics to figure out where the bottlenecks are and then improve the processes. Like, hey, we need someone else to look at Dan's pull request, or Dan needs to be pulled off of these projects so we can, address those pull requests kind of thing.
Yeah, and again, so to even extend, so at that particular thing, you've got metrics, you have a product that is highlighting challenges and things. It itself is not changing the problem, but it's highlighting something that might exist, right? That's the common thing that we're hearing. The other thing is, if your team is made up of rock stars, how well do those rock stars actually play together? Because if you're finding, everybody goes to this one person, that's amazing because that one person is trusted by all that team. However, like you said, he's becoming a bottleneck for
Yep.
work actually transitioning through, and kind of teamwork, collaboration, and that review of how people are working, how they are working in the process, and where things are getting stuck in. Are things constantly getting to done for development, but QA keep turning them back? There's a bottleneck there because maybe something is missing in the statement of done. Before we can transition out. These are all the key identifiers in metrics that you would want to consider later.
Yeah, and maybe that ends up, when you go through these metrics and you have like, you don't want to just review your processes once a year, right? You want to continuously evaluate your processes and do they make sense? And then you go through the processes and then you're like, hey, let me ask some questions. Does this step in the process add value? Or who does it benefit? Or can we take this one out? What happens if we take this piece out?
Exactly.
Are we missing anything, or does it make it more efficient? So
Exactly.
continuous process improvement, I guess.
Absolutely. That's the CPI is important. If we
Yep.
need to constantly evaluate, because again, as you solve one bottleneck, a new one will appear. How far down has it reverted something? That's the evaluation you should constantly be doing as a team.
Yep.
Okay. So automation is key in anything, whether we're talking all in on AI or even back to the kind of the if this then that rules that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, where it's really explicit in terms of the boundaries and parameters that it comes into, right? When can something bloat versus what can help you with friction?
Yeah. So, I equate bloat to sometimes shiny object syndrome. That we have a process that does this, but it'd be really cool if it does this too. And then all of a sudden that snowballs into, well, if we did that, we can also do this. When I vibe code, I have to rein myself in sometimes, because if I'm creating an app, so in the hackathon, I'm doing this app that does a reminder, and just basic reminders. It does custom snooze times. It does custom recurring reminders and everything. And then those are the main features, and then it's the process that the user will use to set the reminders. And then inside my brain, I'm like, oh my god, this would be cool if I could add this to the features, or add this to the project. That would be shiny object syndrome and bloat versus what is actually needed by the user, kind of thing. And so if it's if it's not part of the core features, and it can easily turn into shiny object bloat syndrome.
Exactly, right. So that is where you're moving away from maybe the core requirements of something in your case, right? I think the other thing is that when we think about automating friction, it is about where is my bottleneck, or where is the point where my team are wasting the most amount of manual effort? Can we automate that, or at least automate part of that
Yep.
process so that they don't do everything? So again, we talk about trying to use AI, maybe your MCP. What it's doing is it's automatically collecting all that information, is presenting it to you. It's not maybe resolving all of your knowledge, or is asking you to do the next step or provide the boundaries of which it can operate, but you're automatically being fed something. You're not
Yes.
The friction is no longer there in terms of I have to go to this system, I have to go and research this, I have to go and do that. That's about reducing friction.
Yeah, and in the case of AI, and say, for example, Rovo and a service request, so Rovo is now able to give you the historical view of any other similar tickets. It can bring in the knowledge base for a specific issue. So it can actually start removing that friction of you having to go look this information up, into bringing it in, pushing it to you as you need it within the process.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of characteristics out there in terms of bloat versus friction, but I think that the easiest ones are, is it intrusive? Is it saying like, hey, look at this amazing cool thing, versus, hey, where it's obvious and visible, whereas like, hey, that's not part of the process anymore. You don't have to do that. It's something like maybe unclear value, high maintenance. So this comes in about technical debt. What's the cost of having to maintain this automation versus the value that we're getting out of it? These are the key characteristics that you would have to consider
Yeah.
for any kind of automation examples.
Yeah, totally agree. And then another thing to look at is like we kind of mentioned before, but can I take something away and, in the automation or in the process that can be automated, right? So I don't have to do it, and it makes it more efficient, kind of thing. Instead of saying, "Oh, now let me try to add something new into this process
Mm.
for automation to do."
So let's think about kind of examples of like lean tool chains and lean processes versus something that kind of there's a lot more effort involved. Now, for me, lean is not minimal, it is not cheap, it is about making sure that effort is not wasted. So
Right.
I'm not having to go over there and do something. I'm not having to, I've not got overly prescribed tools. So, I mean, I think the easiest one would probably to be maybe look at like and consider maybe the DevOps toolchain that you use for vibe coding, right? So, how lean is that?
Yeah, yeah. So, and I'm thinking back because I wrote a book on Open DevOps toolchain.
Yeah.
Um, and oh, does Dan have a copy? So, that is exactly, the book was written to help people focus on how they can address their DevOps tool chains from a product perspective. So there's two ways that you can go with that. You can go through an entire Atlassian stack from end to end. So you're using, Bitbucket as your source control, you're using Opsgenie for your monitoring and everything. You're using Confluence for knowledge base. So you're using the entire Atlassian stack for your DevOps toolchain, or you can use the Atlassian platform plus a best of breed approach, right? So maybe your developers are used to using GitHub instead of Bitbucket, so you can plug that into the Atlassian platform. Integrate with
Mm.
Jira and Confluence, and then you can, maybe they use Circle CI or Jenkins for deployments instead of Bamboo pipelines, kind of thing, and so you can
Mm.
plug that in. So again, it is like what makes your DevOps process the most effective for your users, which would be your developers, testing, operations for deployment and everything, and balance that out with, the tools that are being utilized that make everyone happy. So,
Yeah.
again, we just don't want to start throwing in other tools just to have
Just
them,
to see
right?
some.
We want to make sure that it's efficient from that perspective. So, like you said, it's not. We're trying to make sure that we're not wasting any, motion or time
Mm.
by throwing in extra tools. We have the tools that we need to have for the specific process. In this case, it was the DevOps tool chain. So that's a
Yeah.
good
I,
example.
I think that's exactly what it is. So, can you explain what each tool is used for
Yeah.
in a sentence and have that sentence repeated by everybody that would be using it? So, in this case, GitHub, yeah, that's exactly where we store all of our data in terms of all of our actual code. Great.
Yep.
Everybody gives the same answer. It's known what it's used for. It has a very strict purpose. Jira, everybody uses that for actual work management. Great. Now, yes, there's two tools. Now, I know GitHub could do the same as work management, but it's got a specific purpose and it fits with that purpose.
Yep.
Then it comes down in terms of leanness is how well do they talk together? Are your people wasting energy by having to go back into Jira to move a ticket? No, because you've automated that part of the process. Every time a pull request is opened, you've automatically transitioned something maybe to review or
And
whatever it
they're
is, right? Like
and they're integrated. So you put
exactly.
the Jira key in the comment for your GitHub or Bitbucket
Yeah.
commit, and then that shows up in the developer panel on Jira. So you have a full view.
Exactly. And I think this is where I spoke about this before on previous episodes, where it's like trying to create a command center, right? You have one place where everything is visible, everything is workable, everything has a reason. Yes, you've got maybe tool sprawl, but that is used for that. Everybody knows exactly where it is. It's well integrated, so I can deal with the information from that over here as well. That is when you have a lean process because everything fits well into its particular part. Okay, so Ed, we're just before we wrap up then. So AI has a role to play in whether you've got lean products and processes, whether you are trying to identify
Yeah.
what, maybe what is good and what isn't good. But like, how do we avoid the AI paradox and kind of where does AI fit into this?
Yeah, I mean, AI can be a double-edged sword sometimes, right? It can be utilized to really simplify things, but it can also spiral into that, shiny object syndrome that I talked about, where you can, and it actually increases the complexity of your processes or your tool set. Every tool set coming out now is going to have some sort of AI in it, right? And I think it is definitely going to be able to simplify some of the processes. So, for example, Atlassian and Rovo now, Rovo can see across all your tools, right? So Jira, Confluence, Slack, you can actually do searches. If that's part of your processes, is pulling together some information that you need to utilize, Rovo is going to help you do that super quick and more efficiently than if you had to stop and go and look at each one of these other tools to find that information. So from that perspective, AI is definitely going to make it more efficient for utilizing your tools or your tools in a more efficient way.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is some really easy examples. We talked about in previous episodes about enriching data and providing better metadata, better tags,
Yep.
and helping with standardizing, maybe suggesting templates to use and whatever it might be. These are all easy opportunities for AI to make some suggestions. The trouble is the moment you just say, hey, here's a new tool and this AI is going to help you, but you're going to have to learn how to interact with it, or the AI output is vastly different to what is used to expected. Like, these are when it's immediately going to kind of throw some spanners into the works. I think the easiest thing to kind of really avoid that hype trap is to really slow down and understand, map your process and say, hey, this is my process. The team are happy with it, but we're starting to notice this bottleneck. What is the advice from there? And then say, okay, well, that is an opportunity for AI. Don't just say we're going to add AI to it, because no one cares.
Yeah. Again, like we said before, you map your process, and then your users also map their tools to the process and what they're utilizing, and then evaluate which tools have AI that can be beneficial for that user within that process step, right?
Yeah.
So is it going to be able to help them find what they need better? Is it going to be able to intelligently route actions based on previous historical data? Is it can we auto classify information to make it easier to find, kind of thing?
Yeah.
So again, is it going to make your life easier?
I think I mean, some of those definitely what we spoke about in a couple of weeks ago, which is start small. That's where AI, like, understand, be very explicit about this one thing, and measure it and see if there's a more productive outcome that you want to do, and fixing that process, mapping and identifying blockers before you just randomly automate and add the shiny stuff. That's great. Subtract, don't add. Let's try and get leaner on the process. Let's see what happens when you remove things. Let's try and get everybody onto one tool chain and see if that helps. That's when you then say, okay, well, where can AI happen? Or is it even just integrations? That's the kind of the next step. Let's do those first, then let's look at kind of the next thing.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, AI should definitely make your life easier, not more complex. So just always have that in the back of your head.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for yet another episode. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.